What would you call Manchester City's golden age? If you're a 90s or even 80s kid, the obvious answer is right now. Trophy after trophy, some of the most magnificent players money can buy, one of the greatest coaches to ever coach a football club, all are part of the club right now. But we are not talking about them. We're talking about a time being at the top wasn't the norm. Yep, Manchester City, one of the oldest clubs in English football, a club that has apparently, quote, no history, has its own golden age. And in this video, we take a look back at that time. So what are we waiting for? Let's go! Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. Before we get into it, we need some proper context for the time. The year was 1963. Manchester City had just been relegated to the second division. Now, understand that this is not the era where relegation was reserved for the select few. Even the top clubs could and had gotten relegated during this time. And Manchester City were definitely a top club and a top flight mainstay at the time. However, after spending 11 consecutive seasons in the top flight of the Football League, Manchester City were relegated to the second division. But the issue wasn't just relegation. I mean, as we said, no club was safe from relegation at the time. But City's relegation shone light on bigger issues, namely the dwindling popularity. Manchester City for the longest time was the most popular club in Manchester. Yes, even over Manchester United. But Manchester United's rise through the 50s and Manchester City's own lack of performances on the pitch meant that by 1965, Manchester City's average attendances were suffering. While Manchester United was seeing record gains during this time, Manchester City saw their audiences shrink further and further. The most egregious example of bad attendance was when City took on Swindon Town in January of 1965. Only 8,015 people attended the game. Since attendance has been recorded, this was the least attended game in Manchester City's history, even to this day. City hadn't won a trophy since 1956 when they had last won the FA Cup. The final, famous for Bert Chalkman's unknowing heroics. After relegation in 1963, George Poyser took over the managerial duties and brought in important players like Derek Kevan and Jimmy Murray, while also promoting homegrown players like Alan Oakes and Glenn Pardoe. Despite the investment, Manchester City slipped further and further. The 1964-65 season saw City finish 11th in the second division, their worst position ever in the league till that time. Not only that, this was their first time ever heading into a third consecutive season in the second division. Before this, since 1899, they had never spent 2 consecutive seasons in the second division. Their position was truly awful. And Poyser soon resigned in Easter 1965, leaving City managerless heading into the 65-66 season. So, you can see where Manchester City as a club stood. The club desperately needed change in a positive direction. The task of overhauling the club fell on the shoulders of club chairman Albert Alexander. On 30th July 1965, the club appointed Joe Mercer as their next manager. Mercer was a former England international who played as a canny wing half in the first division for championship winning teams at Everton and Arsenal over his 25-year professional career. He was also someone who was familiar with second division football. During his tenure as a manager, both Sheffield United and Aston Villa were relegated to the second division. However, he successfully led Villa back up with a youthful squad dubbed, quote, Mercer's Miners. Despite this achievement, the pressure of maintaining their position in the first division significantly affected his health. He suffered a stroke in 1964 and was then fired from his job. Mercer, despite his ailments, believed he still had much to offer to Villa, but felt he was treated awfully and thus decided to move on, which he called, quote, a split by mutual consent. So Mercer joined Manchester City, but he wasn't in a condition to run the day-to-day operations alone by himself. He needed somebody who could help run training sessions and such. To share the responsibilities, Mercer chose a young up-and-coming manager, Mercer-Allison, whose own professional playing career was cut short due to tuberculosis. Allison was coming off a managerial stint with Plymouth Argyle and had job offers from Stanley Matthews at Port Vale and Raish Carter at Middlesbrough, but he took the Manchester City job. With the coaching staff sorted, Mercer made his first signing for Manchester City. And it was none other than one of the most influential players to ever play for Manchester City, Mike Summerby, for £35,000 from Swindon Town. Later in the season, Mercer made his second and arguably one of the biggest signings in Manchester City's history, Colin Bell from Bury for £45,000. Buoyed by some great performances through the season, Manchester City won the second division, getting promoted to the first division in the process. The Mercer-Allison partnership was working wonders for the Sky Blues. Manchester City finished the 1966-67 season in 15th position, but there were definite signs of improvements, like losing only 4 games from the last 18 matches. Manchester United had won the 1966-67 First Division League title, while City had finished 15th. At the time, United player Paddy Crerand bet Mercer-Allison £10 that Manchester City would never again attract crowds of 30,000 because, as we know, City was struggling with dwindling crowds at the time. Well, the bet proved foolish as City's fortunes turned. The 1967-68 season proved to be a historic season for them. On 9th October 1967, Manchester City made another era-defining signing in Francis Lee for a record £60,000 from Bolton Wanderers. After a slightly shaky start, City's fortune improved. After losing 3 consecutive matches that included a 2-1 loss at home to Manchester United, Manchester City found their groove and went on an unbeaten run of 11 matches, during which they probably played one of their best matches ever against Tottenham Hotspurs. Known as Ballet on Ice, Manchester City played one of their best games ever on a frozen pitch. To think that it was not even clear if the match would take place. Heavy snow had put the game in doubt. However, Coach Allison was adamant that game would go ahead. The match was televised on Match of the Day. That proved to be an added motivation for Allison. City went behind early, but Allison knew how to motivate his players, and his words encouraged a different approach that turned the game on its head. Aided by a modification to the studs on their boots suggested by Tony Book, City produced one of their best footballing performances in their history. Colin Bell, Neil Young, Tony Coleman and Mike Summerby all scored, ending the game 4-1 in favour of City against a very talented Spurs side. One Spurs player was quoted as saying, "It was extraordinary. City moved like Olympic speed skaters while we were falling around like clowns on a skid patch." As Allison anticipated, their appearance on Match of the Day helped bring attention from all over the country. Letters flooded into both City and the BBC. Even Tottenham fans wrote to say how much they enjoyed the performance. City's winning streak came to an end when they lost back-to-back to West Bromwich Albion. When City visited Old Trafford on 27th March 1968, United had just taken the lead in the league table over City. Manchester City went on to beat United 3-1 at their home. The final stretch of the season became very tense, but City pulled through with consecutive wins against Sheffield Wednesday, Everton and Tottenham Hotspurs, arriving at St James Park on the final day with the title hanging in the balance. On the final day, Manchester City and United were level on points, but City held the advantage on goal average. United were favourites as they were facing a bottom half team in Sunderland. The game proved to be a seesaw battle that saw Newcastle come back from behind twice to equalise. However, after half-time, Young scored his second goal of the game while Francis Lee added a fourth one. Newcastle scored late in the game, but Manchester City hung on to finish the game 4-3. Sunderland beat Manchester United 2-1 to hand the league title to Manchester City. At long last, Manchester City did it. They had won the first Division League title. This was their first trophy since 1956 FA Cup and their first league title in 31 years. The Mercer-Allison duo was working wonders. The train of success did not stop here though. The next season, Manchester City's league form declined, but they did begin the season by winning the Charity Shield against West Bromwich Albion 6-1. But the most impressive was their FA Cup run. They beat Luton Town, Newcastle United, Blackburn Rovers, Tottenham Hotspurs and Everton en route a final showdown with Leicester City, who they beat 1-0 to win the FA Cup. That wasn't all. Despite finishing 13th in the league, Manchester City managed to qualify for the European Cup Winners' Cup because of their FA Cup triumph. This was their second appearance in Europe, first being in the 1967-68 season's European Cup. The 1969-70 season proved to be one of the most prolific seasons for any English club. City lost the Charity Shield at the beginning of the season and the league run did not really pan out. But it was still an overall satisfying league campaign where they did a league double over Manchester United, beating them 4-0 at home and 2-1 away. Manchester City also went on a cup run, but this time it was the League Cup. City went through Southport, Liverpool, Everton and Queen's Park Rangers to meet their cross-town rivals Manchester United in the League Cup semi-finals. In what turned out to be a close tie, Manchester City beat United at home 2-1 and then went to Old Trafford to draw 2-2, knocking United out and making it to the League Cup final. In the League Cup final, West Bromwich Albion took an early lead, but Michael Doyle equalised in the 60th minute and forced the game into extra time. Glenn Pardoe scored the winner with a volley in the 102nd minute to seal the match and the League Cup trophy. But season's biggest triumph was waiting yet. As we said earlier, the European Cup Winners' Cup was only City's second foray into a European competition, the first being the last season's European Cup, where they were eliminated in the first round. City had an explosive start to the tournament, drawing 3-3 away to Athletic Bilbao before beating them 3-0 at home, a 6-3 win on aggregate. Next up were the Belgian club Liège, and City routed them, demolished them with an 8-0 aggregate score. The quarter-finals against Académica from Portugal proved to be a cagey affair. After regular time in both legs, neither team could land a punch on the other and the game remained 0-0. It was only Mark Tarver's absolute last-minute goal in the extra time that sent City into the semi-finals. In the semi-final, Schalke broke City's unbeaten run in the competition when they beat them 1-0 at home. But it just seemed to have woken them up as the return leg at Main Road saw Michael Doyle, Neil Young, Francis Lee and Colin Bell all score, with Young scoring a brace as City routed Schalke 5-1 to make it to the finals. The final was set against the Polish club Konik Zabrze. City were missing Summerby from the starting lineup due to a leg injury, though he was fit enough to be on the bench. City started strongly, especially through Francis Lee. Neil Young scored early in the 12th minute when Kostka parried a Lee shot only to be tapped in by Young. In the dying embers of the first half, Young got fouled by Kostka in the box, resulting in a penalty. Lee scored the penalty in an emphatic fashion. Gornik did get a goal back in the 68th minute, but it was not enough. Manchester City had done it. They had won the European Cup Winners' Cup. The year of 1970 proved to be the height of Man City's on-field performances as they successfully did the domestic and European Cup double. Not only that, since being promoted in 1966, the Mercer-Allison duo had helped City win 4 major trophies. And unlike today, when domestic trophies are seen more as a hindrance and with disdain, those days they were truly revered. It had been an exhilarating journey. Huge crowds started to gather again at Main Road to see England internationals like Francis Lee, Colin Bell and Mike Summerby in action. Manchester City had grown substantially, allowing its fans to proudly stand tall against their local rivals, Manchester United, and its iconic players such as George Best, Dennis Law, and Bobby Charlton. City continued to give a strong account of themselves when they made it to the semi-finals of the next European Cup Winners' Cup in 1971. En route, they met their ECWC final rivals from the last year, Górnik, in the quarter-finals. They lost to them 2-0 in Poland in the first leg, watched by 100,000 people in the stands. After the match, the City duo of Francis Lee and Mike Summerby celebrated their loss on the pitch in front of the bemused Polish supporters and players. The return leg was won by Manchester City 2-0, meaning City and Górnik had a replay at a neutral venue where City beat Górnik 3-1 to make it to the semi-finals. In the semi-finals, City met another English club, Chelsea. However, City were severely depleted due to injuries to a number of key players. Alan Oakes, Colin Bell, Mike Doyle, Glenn Pardoe, and Mike Summerby were all out before the first leg, while Tommy Booth and goalkeeper Joe Corrigan were injured for the second. Chelsea went past City 1-0 in both the legs, knocking them out. While things seemed to be good and stable on the field, off the field, they really were not. October 1971 saw Mercer-Allison become the team manager while Joe Mercer assumed the role of general manager. City performed well for most of the season and on 18th March 1972 held a 5-point lead. But City fell apart, winning only 3 of their last 8 games and fell all the way to 4th. A lot of the blame of this capitulation fell on the signing of Rodney Marsh, who was signed for a club record £200,000. At the time of his signing, City were 4 points clear at the top. Many pundits criticized the signing, pointing out that Marsh was a maverick, ill-suited to Allison's well-drilled setup. During this time, the relationship between Mercer and Allison had also deteriorated. Allison had grown resentful of Mercer because in his mind, it was him doing the work while Mercer got more of the credit. He believed it was his destiny to be manager, recalls Colin Schindler, a lifelong Man City fan and author of Manchester United Ruined My Life. People were telling him he was a genius. So after 6 years of partnership, Allison engineered a boardroom coup. Mercer decided to leave before he could be pushed out in June 1972. The final straw came when Mercer claimed that his parking space and his name from the door of his office had been removed, while Chairman Peter Swales later said the board had to choose between Mercer-Allison and Joe Mercer, and we chose Mercer-Allison. Allison, however, could not handle the pressure of being the team manager, as he resigned midway through the 1972-73 season with City at the brink of relegation. Only a late season surge saved City as they finished 11th. Allison could not motivate players anymore. Schindler said he had been saying the same things to them for the last 7 years. Post-Mercer-Allison era saw City stagnate. Peter Swales took over the club chairmanship, and under his 20-year tenure, City slipped further and further, becoming a yo-yo club. Till the Abu Dhabi takeover, the 1976 League Cup trophy remained the only trophy City won since Mercer and Allison left the club. We have covered this era of Manchester City in this video. Please do take a look. So you can see the golden age of City came and went, during which they won trophies and gave countless memories to their supporters while playing some great football. The club that has, quote, no history has plenty of history to draw inspiration from, but also presents a cautionary tale against complacency and bad management. Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it, share if you find it worthy, and subscribe for more content like this. This is Salty Football.